Okay, I'm going to be talking about the media strategy of modern terrorism and how it is intentionally designed for most effective impact. I want to start with a big warning and a serious warning. There's going to be some graphic content in here. There's going to be some offensive content. خليني أحكيها بالعربي هيدي كمان. في بعض المواد اللي ممكن بعضكم يعتبرها مهينة للدين، للأمة، للبلد، للوطنية، لأي شيء. ما الهدف إهانة حدا. I do not intend to offend anyone, but this is content that is available on the internet. Okay? And I think people who are media literate need to be aware of it. كل واضح بهذا الشيء؟ في بعض الآيات القرآنية، بعض الصلوات محطوطة على كرتونز، في بعض الصور لكرتون خنازير، في اللي بحس حاله انه هيدا موضوع مهم. من هلا عم بكون بعتذر على هذا الموضوع، لكن احنا بصرح علمي مفروض نقدر ندرس هيدي المواد. متفقين؟ Okay, and I will try to avoid some of the most bloody content in this lecture. So let me start first with a case study. The Paris attack. Everybody remembers that? So it happened on November 13th, but the day before, on November 12, 2015, ISIS sent out a video. And the title of the video is "Soon, very soon, the blood will spill like an ocean." A very ominous warning. The video was actually produced in Russian. The next day, multiple attacks happened. One in Beirut, Dahi. Another one, the downing of a Russian plane above Egypt, above Sinai. And the most covered in terms of the media was the attack in Paris. On November 13, 14, around midnight, between 9 and 9:40 p.m., 4 suicide attacks happened, a lot of shooting. There was a hostage situation in a club in Paris. The police were able to storm in the club, the concert hall, around midnight. They killed the attackers. 2 of them actually detonated themselves. And there was overall 89 people killed. So, warning video the day before, multiple terrorist attacks. The next day, at 1:20 a.m., just a few minutes after this whole event occurred, we started seeing pro-ISIS tweets coming out. Some of them hashtagged attack on Paris, Paris burning, a lot of them applauding the Paris attack. Notice the one at the bottom with the French flag and a footprint on it, almost immediately after this has happened. Which makes me sometimes suspicious that these tweets, this content, these images, which take time sometimes to produce, were ready to be put out there. If you notice also at the bottom, the appropriation of the hashtag Paris burning, that was more sympathetic to the French people, to the Parisian people, but they actually used it in order to get more coverage. And what would usually happen in these situations, and this is something that I didn't interpret, I didn't discover, it was actually something written in the manuscripts, in the documents, in the propaganda documents of ISIS, guidelines of how to use online media, how to use Twitter. What they use is something called a Twitter storm. The technique is that there is a 3-tiered group of ISIS supporters. The main leadership, which is a small group of people, maybe a couple of dozen. Then the very hardcore supporters, who are operatives. And then there is the broader supporters. When something like this happens, the leadership, each one of them sends out a tweet. And they tweet each other's tweets. And then this activates the second level of hardcore supporters who have already been alerted a day before or something through the videos. Then these people also start tweeting and retweeting each other. And then the broad supporting base starts doing the same thing, which creates what is called as a Twitter storm. It brings up the level of tweets up to a level where it starts triggering trending levels of tweets, which also gets media exposure, attracts more people, attracts more audiences. They actually also have an app you install on your phone where you don't have to wait for them to send something and be waiting to tweet it. It will automatically retweet it itself. It will capture the tweets from whoever leadership or supporter you are following, and it would retweet it to everyone in your list. And at one point, they actually revised and it would just hijack your phone, and it would pose as some other benign application. Going back to the Paris attack, November 14th, the next day, around noon, ISIS claims responsibility. Although well before that, the tweets were saying, even if it's not ISIS, we support that. This is an attack on whatever enemy nation. But even then, supporters start tweeting the press release, the official press release. And in terms of how they do it when they start tweeting it, they put the press release out in a gazillion links, many different sources, many different servers. So that, for example, if they put it on Dropbox institution will not, the company won't take it down immediately. By the time they take it down, somebody would have taken it from somewhere else. Let me show you an example. So here's a press release. Look at these links. Every single one of them. By the time somebody figures out what they're doing and starts putting them down, it's already spread. It's way too late. No one can actually stop this in advance. Even if it takes 5 minutes, by the time they stop it, it's already tweeted, downloaded by multiple supporters, and retweeted and sent again. At 3 p.m. that same day, a re-edited video of ISIS fighters speaking in French resurfaces. It was produced earlier, about a year earlier, but they recut it, and they only emphasize the French fighters burning their passports, calling on French Muslims to either come to the Khilafah, to the Caliphate, or to fight the infidels inside of France. I'll show you a small bit of that video. Notice the logo similar to Al Jazeera's logo, right?
Celui qui mécroit au Tarot et qui croit Allah a certes ses lances la plus solide qui ne peut se briser, et Allah est celui qui entend et celui qui sait. Comme vous avez mécrit au Tarot, comme vous avez mécrit à la démocratie et à la loi humaine, en faisant le hijra, aujourd'hui vous mécroyez à ces tawarit et à toute cette loi que nous a imposé ces tawarit et à tous ces passeports que nous a imposé ces tawarit. Nous mécroyons en vous, entre vous et nous l'inimité et la haine.
Pas les moyens, ni la possibilité. Sachez que le combat, à l'heure actuelle, est une obligation individuelle. L'ordre vous a été donné de combattre le mécréant ou il y a un État islamique géré par...
Faites ce que vous pouvez faire pour les humilier, car ils ne méritent que ça. Alhamdulillah.
And it doesn't end there. After that video, the next day, multiple official posts from multiple media arms of ISIS come out, videos, photos, celebrating the attacks. Just reconfirming, we did it. No matter how small that impact is in terms of geopolitics, although of course it affects a lot of the lives of many people, many celebrations around the ISIS-controlled territories and in some cases around the world. Next day, another video warning. This one targets mainly the US, but targets specifically a message to the Nation of the Cross, mainly Christians. Very well produced. I'm not going to show it to you because it's also very bloody. November 18, Dabiq, issue 12 comes out, the official magazine of ISIS. It includes the Paris attack, the Russian plane downing, and the Beirut attack. For any one of you who has worked in magazines, knows how long it takes to produce something like that. And to include stories that are well written, with good layout and images. If you've ever seen Dabiq, and I'll show you an example at the end, it's extremely well produced. It looks just like any other international magazine, you name it, Newsweek, Time. You can look through the language, impeccable English, impeccable grammar. Which again reconfirms my suspicion that all of these media productions are planned in advance. And not only planned in advance, they are actually part of the planning of the terrorist attack. So you can imagine a group of people saying, okay, we're going to be doing this, this, this. We're going to be attacking Beirut, Paris, and downing a plane. The media person is actually at that table discussing. Okay, we will send a message out before, we will do this, we'll make sure to get our supporters on Twitter, on Facebook, or whatever to do that. It's not two separate things. It's not terrorist attack happens, then media coverage, or tweets suddenly sent out. And this is the goal behind the title of the design of terrorism, or design of modern terrorism, which includes the media component within it. Of course, in the aftermath of this, all of Europe, not just France, plunged in anxiety. You know the story after that. Multiple attacks in Europe, multiple attacks in the Arab world and across the globe. You probably heard of the Munich attack a couple of weeks ago. We were actually in Salzburg. It was right before the weekend, and our students were going to be traveling all over to Vienna, to Munich, to other places, and we actually got one of our students stuck in Munich during the crackdown. But what I want to highlight is what happened not only in terms of people in Europe being fearful, being terrified that something's going to happen to them, but also the increase in anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner sentiment, the increase in xenophobia right after that attack. And we were very concerned actually that this will happen. One of the videos that surfaced right after the Munich attack was a group of Germans basically commemorating or mourning the death of the victims of that attack. And in the background there was someone saying Allahu Akbar, and then we can start hearing people shouting back and forth, and you can see the tensions going up. And this is very important for a point that I'm going to bring up in a moment. So most of you are familiar with the ISIS or Daesh phenomenon. It's a pretty recent phenomenon. It's a group that split from Al-Qaeda, and there's many theories behind who is funding it, how it got here, what it's doing, who are the countries behind it, what are the conspiracies behind it. I'm not going to go into that. I'm really not interested in ISIS as an ISIS group. I'm interested in how modern groups like ISIS, you want to call them terrorist group, you want to call them guerrilla fighters, you want to call them revolutionaries, you want to call them fanatics, jihadists, call them whatever you want. How do they use the media to advance their causes? This is what I'm interested in. They now control a land as big as Britain. It's shrinking according to the latest reports, strikes from Russia, attacks from the Iraqi army, but that really doesn't matter. Because the whole point that I'm trying to push here is that these groups have advanced over the past century, and they've created a model for future groups. Even if ISIS is wiped out tomorrow, they've already created a model for future groups to follow. 30,000 foreign recruits. This is the key to understanding why the whole world is obsessed with this topic. And of course, all the terrorist attacks that are happening around the world. But again, this is the key. They're creating a model. I'd like you to keep in mind three things as we go through this lecture. First, that ISIS builds on real grievances that exist in this part of the world, that exists among Arabs, among Muslims, among Middle Easterners. Grievances that actually many of us in this room, if not all of us, believe in. And I can name quite a few. The Palestinian struggle, authoritarianism in the Arab world, puppet regimes in the Arab world, poverty, Sykes-Picot, the promise of Balfour, all of those we're familiar with, right? And they actually use those. They use those and present themselves. Here's the key. They present themselves as the solution. And the problem is right now that there's no one else presenting a viable solution. The secular solutions, the secular governments that in the 50s and 60s came up, suddenly turned authoritarian on us and threw us in jail, limited our freedom of expression, and they are discredited now. There's only these groups who are saying, yeah, these are the problems that we all believe need to be resolved, and here's my solution, al-Khilafah, right? This is like advertising. This is actually a very persuasive argument. Actually, Trump is using it. Trump will probably become president because of this kind of argument, that America is in a very bad place, and we can become greater again, and I'm the solution to that. Vote for me. He's actually using ISIS techniques. The second one is the duality of terrorism. Terrorism is an awful thing when we think about it. It's has very negative connotations. There's death, there's killing, it's very random, and we will talk a little bit more about the theory of terrorism and how to understand it within the context of media. But when it comes to ISIS, they're actually not shying away from terrorism because terrorism gives them a lot of advantage. And a lot of the lecture will focus on that. There's a positive edge for terrorism in their mind. They're not shying away from actually being seen as negative, as being seen as terrorists. In fact, they are capitalizing on these frames. The war on terrorism, yeah, this is us. And you'll see how they use those to their advantage. And finally, eliminating the gray. What do I mean by eliminating the gray or polarizing people? And this is not something, again, I interpreted or I came up with. This is actually something written in the texts, in the guidelines of ISIS scholars, if you want to call them, or ideologues. I'll put some text in Arabic, but I'll say them in English. This is from the document Idarat Tawahhush. You can find it online, and I advise you to actually read it to understand really what they're doing. Everything written in there, they're actually applying on the ground. None of this is interpretation. The goal is to drag people to a battle where there's polarization between all the people. Polarization. There's two sides. There's people with us, people against us. Remember George Bush? Very effective. There's no gray in the middle. That's their goal. It requires more works that will light up the confrontation and that will make people enter the battle, whether they like it or not. This is their goal, or one of their goals. And this is actually very easily achieved with terrorism. But let's track back a little bit and go into a few theoretical matters that would really help us understand the ISIS phenomenon and how they use media. First, let's start looking at ISIS as a virtual state. Not as a group of crazy, irrational people. That would be the first mistake to do if we really want to fight this kind of phenomenon. And what would help us when we start thinking about that is there's a lot of communication and media theories that we've been actually researching and using and developing over the past century that we can use to better understand this group. This idea didn't, again, come from me. I read about it in an article in Foreign Affairs, and it was talking about comparing ISIS to Al-Qaeda. These are two very different groups, and if the US and Europe and whoever other governments want to fight them, they can't be using the same tactics of limiting their finances or the movement of money from one place to another. They already control the actual sources, the oil wells in Iraq and Syria, and they can make their own money. What is a virtual state? There are three kinds in general, according to Philip Sieb. A recognized virtual state, for example, Lebanese Americans in the US, living in the US. The Lebanese government can actually target this group of people via Arab satellite or anything. And the target could be for financial or economic reason, to invite people to come in summer to Lebanon to, I don't know, help the Lebanese economy by spending money here. The second kind is a de facto nation. Kurdistan, Palestine are some examples, nations that exist but are not recognized officially. And then there's the last group that actually Philip Sieb introduces, the non-state actors. And you can think of those as international NGOs, but you can also think of those as what we call today terrorist groups, or some people call them jihadists or something. So I invite you to just, for this lecture, to think about ISIS as a virtual state that uses terrorism as opposed to a terrorist group, and which triggers immediately the idea that these are evil killers, irrational beings, randomly shooting people. That is probably the worst thing we can do at this point if we really want to understand and stop them. A virtual state idea will help us introduce a few concepts, like public diplomacy, like framing, both media theories, and more. What is public diplomacy? Public diplomacy is a technique that governments around the world use to target people in other countries without going through the regular diplomatic channels. It's actually been innovated by the United States. Examples? Rio, how many of you have been following the news about Brazil? You're bombarded with that, right? Negative and positive. I promise you it will mostly be positive. We've done a study about China during the Olympics. We were at the Salisbury Academy, and we found overwhelmingly positive coverage. This is one technique of public diplomacy. It could be, again, for economic reasons, for cultural reasons, to put the name of a country on the map. It could also be for specific political reasons. For example, USAID or USAID. And their goal is to promote US foreign policy and economic growth by assisting those in need. You have a project, we'll give you some funding, we'll slap a sticker USAID from the American people. It brings in some goodwill and some positive branding imagery of that country, right? I'm going to show you a video about modern public diplomacy in the age of the internet.
Every day, millions of people worldwide use online social networks to share photographs, make connections, and cement friendships. But a growing number are also pioneering a much more innovative use, transforming the internet into a powerful tool for change. These individuals, harnessing the ability to instantly communicate with millions of others, are using social networking sites to launch grassroots movements, to organize rallies, protests, and smart mobs, to resist oppression, circumvent censorship, and denounce violence. In short, they are converting online activism into concrete, real-world results. New media company Howcast joined forces with the U.S. State Department, Google, Facebook, YouTube, MTV, and other sponsors to host the first ever Alliance of Youth Movement Summit. The conference brought together delegates representing 17 pioneering youth movements from around the world.
Part of what we want to do here is bring groups together, share common practices, and try to inspire other groups to harness the same technologies in order to push for positive political and social change.
We have a Facebook cause with over 500,000 friends, a MySpace page with 250,000 friends, and an email list which numbers in the hundreds of thousands.
I think we promote democracy basically by being what we are, by making the world more open, by making people more connected, by giving them a forum to be able to be heard.
So before the age of the internet, public diplomacy was mainly influencing mass media, influencing the framing of news about a certain country. And this is exactly what Robert Entman talks about when it comes to what he calls mediated public diplomacy. That is more short-term, more targeted. I'm going to read this for translation. Targeted short-term aims that utilize media technologies to increase support of a country's specific foreign policies among audiences beyond that country's borders. This is one of the goals of USAID. This is one of the goals of many different US organizations. And there's actually a theoretical framework for how it works. And when does it work, when does it not work? When does a message sent from the White House or whatever US foreign affairs entity, how that frame reaches certain gatekeepers and how it reaches a country, whether it successfully remains positive or serves its purpose or not. And there's a huge model behind that. We don't really need to go into the details. I'd like to just only apply it to ISIS. But let me first very quickly define what framing is for those who are not familiar. Frames promote a particular problem definition. That's the first and most important part. Causal interpretation, moral evaluation, and or treatment recommendation. The second most important is the last one. The problem and the solution. You're all familiar with this image? Anyone doesn't know what this image is? Go ahead. All right. Palestinian child holding a rock against a tank, right? What kind of problem statement can we have here with this image? What's the problem? Anyone? Anyone of the assistant students can help?
الصورة كانت مؤثرة كثير إنه هي بيفرجوا إنه الإسرائيلي بيواجه بالدبابة بالسلاح بينما الطفل واقف قدام الدبابة بالسلاح.
شو المشكلة؟ What is the problem statement؟ يعني إذا بدك تحدد مشكلة بهذه الصورة، شو هي؟
مشكلة إنه الإرهاب أو الاحتلال كيف الاحتلال على الإسرائيلي.
Okay, occupation is the problem. Any other problem statement? Thanks, Mike.
هلا بتنشاف الصورة حسب مين الجهة اللي بتبث هاي الصورة أو اللي بتحكي عنها.
أنت جهة.
بالنسبة لنا كفلسطينيين إحنا شفنا إنه هذا طفل صغير هو ضحية لاحتلال مش عايش طفولته اللي الوضع اللي عايش فيه خلاه يطلع على الشارع وهو بهذا العمر يمكن أهله ما بيعرفوا ماسك حجر بواجه دبابة كانت داخلة على البلد وقتها وكان في أطفال غيره بس هو اللي ظهر بالصورة.
So brutal.
هلا بالنسبة للجانب الآخر.
No.
Okay.
Let's start with that with one problem. Let's have someone else give a problem. We will get there. We will get to you back to you. I'll let you have another take on it, but let's get another problem statements. From someone else. من حد تاني. هلا برجع لك.
It looks like they're putting the child is putting his life in danger, so it kind of gives excuse because it gives excuse for them to killing the child because they'd be like he was in the way, we couldn't stop. It would give validation to the claims that
so reckless child, right?
Yes.
That's another interpretation to the same image, right? Terrorism, brutal terrorism, desperate measures, reckless child jumping in front of a tank, right? What else? What other problem statement can we have? Anyone else? Okay, go ahead. Anyone else would come up with something different? Go ahead. Okay, so occupation still is a problem. Any other problem statements? Any other interpretations? There could be 100 different interpretations for this image. We have a couple of people here. 2 handheld wireless mics, please, on. Thank you. No, just this image. All right, what problem of coexistence? So we have an issue, a cultural divide here. What else?
It may be behind the scenes in a movie.
Okay. So this is fiction, this is not real.
Yeah.
This is a Photoshop image, right? It can be real.
You asked me to look for the picture without its index, its context.
Okay, one more problem statement, one more interpretation, a different one.
اوكي هلا هاي الصورة سبقها الإسرائيليين على إنه الأطفال من صغرهم بيواجهوا يعني بيتعلموا على الإرهاب والأشياء اللي زي هيك، كمان الصورة مش كاملة لأنه هذا الطفل قتل، هلا هاي الصورة ما بتوضح إنه قتل.
Okay.
الطفل فارس سعودي قتله الاحتلال وما بتبين بالصورة.
Okay, so brainwashing of children and missing information in this image, inaccurate representation.
اوكي بيعملوا دعاية بالغرب مثلا بيسوقوا لشيء معين إنه الأطفال من الصغر بإرهاب.
Okay, so raising a generation of terrorists, right, from childhood. Okay, so let me ask you, would you have the same solution for each one of these problem statements? So with the problem of occupation, occupation is the problem. What would be the solution? Anyone? What would be the solution to this problem? All right.
Well, they have to defend their country and their land because it's an occupation.
What would be the solution to raising a generation of terrorists? Huh? Whatever the way you define it. Now, what is the solution?
There is no solution.
There is no solution. We just let them keep killing each other. I mean, that could be one interpretation.
I mean, if there was a solution, it would have been resolved by now.
No, we're talking about framing and how the news would represent this image and how they would interpret it, how they would state the problem. And in many cases, whether they state the solution or not, it's often interpreted by the people. But actually, your response of there's no solution is actually today the response of most people around the world when it comes to Palestine. It's like Susan's compassion fatigue. Read her book about that. Like, we've heard so much about Palestinian suffering that we've given up. We can't do anything about it. What would be another solution? Bomb Gaza, masalan? Remove the terrorists?
Can you?
Huh?
Can you do it?
I don't know. I think Israel.
We can sit down and throw tons of theories around on how to resolve this, but actually, it's not going to resolve this way unless big nations or countries decide to actually resolve it, then it is going to get resolved.
That's another interpretation, right? What I'm trying to get to here is that every single image, every single piece of information could be framed in a certain way, and this framing creates certain causal interpretations, certain moral evaluations. Is this a problem of occupation? Occupation is bad. Occupation is evil. We need to remove occupation. Is this a problem of terrorism, using children, right? Then the problem is the terrorists who are raising these kids. Let's eliminate the terrorists. Those are two different, very different worlds for the same exact image. And you can start seeing how something like this, or any conflict in the world, any issue around the world, could be interpreted or framed in multiple ways. So bringing us back to public diplomacy. Public diplomacy, the goal of public diplomacy is to basically control the frames and send positive frames to certain publics around the world. France wants to influence Lebanese Christians with certain positive frames about France. So there's an effort towards that, having the message go through media channels, through gatekeepers. Today, of course, with the world, with the internet and Web 2.0 and social media, that's a much more complex idea. But let's go back to ISIS. This is actually exactly what ISIS is doing. If you start thinking of ISIS as a state, as a virtual state, sorry, not as a group of killers, irrational killers, although they are killers, not the irrational part. They're actually very rational and very smart. You can start tracking their efforts. The example I gave you before, the case study about Paris, this is not one case. We've been studying multiple cases, and every single time, well, most of the times, we have the same trend. Send a warning, terrorist attack, tweeting, Twitter storm, media coverage, celebrate, then after that, send recruitment videos. This is their goal. One of their main goals is recruitment. The other goal is to terrify the enemy. Remember the elimination of the gray, polarizing people? The duality of terrorism? The same message of terrorism terrifies some people, but reaches others in a very different way. This is the difficulty of dealing with terrorism on multiple levels. Let us go into the theory of terrorism. One of the most prominent and widely cited definitions is the following by Wilkinson. Terrorism is a premeditated act or threat designed to create a climate of extreme fear directed at a wider target than the immediate victims. Inherently involves random or symbolic targets, especially civilians, used primarily to influence governments, communities, or specific social groups. Let me emphasize this, directed at a wider target than the immediate victims. What does that mean? And how does that work? Anyone? You have someone over there. Thanks, Alan.
For example, let's take the Paris attack. The immediate victims were the people who died, but the actual target is Paris. It's the Western world.
Okay.
And it's ISIS
How does that work?
message. It's ISIS sending that message that we can get to you. Even
How does that message get to them?
Because the direct victims are the people who died, and those are nationals of France. So
Okay.
they do get that message.
How do they know about it though? Where do the people of France, of Europe, of the world know about this? How
Before
are they
it
targeted?
happens?
Huh?
Before it happens, or
No, when it happens, after it happens.
it's obvious. I mean, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure your question.
Well, let's have someone else. Let's see how obvious it is. It's actually very obvious. It's very intuitive. Once you state it, it's yes, duh, of course. Go ahead. By repetition of what?
Repeating the events. Once at Munich, and the first time at Paris in the concert, and at the stadium, then the
So
news attack.
multiple attacks.
Yeah, multiple attacks.
But how are people knowing about it? Just because it's multiple
Through the
attacks?
news. Through the news. And the propagandas of the news and their
Alright.
companies and everything around that.
It sounds very silly and intuitive, actually.
I
right?
know, it's something.
Of course, it's the media, right? Of course, it's the media.
media.
But let me emphasize this point. Let me emphasize this point by bringing out a quote. Media comprise terrorism's oxygen. It's not just that media send the message out. It's not just that media help terrorism. Media wouldn't even exist. Terrorism wouldn't even exist without media. The philosophical statement, if there's a tree that falls in the desert and nobody knows about it, did it actually happen? Yeah. If terrorism happens in the desert and nobody covered it, did it actually happen? It's technically not terrorism anymore. Unless somebody spread the information, because the goal is to spread fear, right? If that fear message is not spread, no matter how many attacks you have,
You need to
it doesn't make any message. Can you take the microphone, please? This creates a big problem for journalists. How many journalists in the room? All right. Do you cover or do you not cover terrorism? Terrorism is the alarm for my parking. Look now, make sure you renew the parking. You cover terrorism, you are actually spreading the news. You are actually helping the terrorists. The other theory, the other spectrum, the other side of the spectrum says, well, if you don't cover terrorism, you're actually putting people at risk. If the Paris attack was not covered widely, people would be still going into these clubs and would be getting killed. If you don't cover terrorism, here's another one, the terrorists will actually keep on escalating until you start covering it, until you have no other option. That actually happened at one point with ISIS. You remember the Jordan pilot, right? The Jordanian pilot. When cutting heads was no longer enough, taking photos and shooting people in photos and putting short videos was no longer enough, the media, that's boring now. Then they escalated. Let's burn him alive, right? And they kept on escalating, and including all these different media components and storytelling techniques, which we will talk about in a moment. If you think of any major terrorist attack, think of the place, think of the time, think of the symbolism of it. 9/11, the most widely covered terrorist attack. New York City, the center of New York City, the center of economic power, the symbol of economic power, the World Trade Center during rush hour in the morning, probably at any moment in time, there was 100 cameras pointed at that building to achieve maximum exposure. Same thing when they attack train stations with a lot of people and a lot of cameras these days, especially with all these mobile smart phones with you. There are different techniques of how to cover terrorism. There's a lot of theories. We'll address that very quickly. I'll show you a video from AJ Plus that tackled this, but I'll give you first an example. Here's the execution of UK humanitarian aid worker Ellen Henning. So the Independent could have put this image and probably helped ISIS in their effort of spreading propaganda, but they decided to put this. I'll read the text. On Friday, a decent, caring human being was murdered in cold blood. Our thoughts are with his family. He was killed on camera for the sole purpose of propaganda. Here is the news, not the propaganda. That's one way of doing it. Unfortunately, it's not the most common way.
There's one thing we can all agree on. The Islamic State group propaganda machine is absolutely terrifying, but it's effective. As we speak, their media center is producing slick, multilingual, Hollywood-esque videos and distributing them on social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. Their recorded beheadings and mass slaughters are too many to ignore. But just like our colleagues at other news organizations, we at AJ Plus face a dilemma. How do we report news about ISIS, especially in the absence of independent journalists on the ground? How should we handle their pornographic violence, their news programs, and their softer, more emotional messages? It's all clearly intended to manipulate the world's perception of them. Should we rebroadcast it on our platforms? Should we ignore it and refuse to engage with it altogether? If this is our generation's information war, how do we win? Where as journalists do we position ourselves on that battlefield? Propaganda in wartime is nothing new. It's used to strike fear in the hearts of enemies and break down their will to fight. It also maintains unity and goodwill among allies banded together for a common goal. The Nazis were experts at it. So are the Russians, the Israelis, the Chinese, and the Americans.
Weapons, mass destruction.
The list goes on. But the tactics of modern propaganda have changed, even in just the last few years. It wasn't too long ago that Osama bin Laden had to find a middleman to deliver his grainy VHS tapes from his cave to a media outlet willing to broadcast his messages. Even then, journalists ultimately decided what was or wasn't shared with the world. But that isn't up to us anymore. Social media has democratized the spread of information. Anyone, anywhere, can post a message. The perceived success of ISIS is through these tools, and this strategy is problematic for journalists. Their propaganda has crowded out independent journalists who undermine their narrative, and reporting on this conflict is deadly. The recorded beheadings of James Foley and Stephen Sotloff were meant to horrify Western audiences and grab our attention, but they also sent a clear message to other reporters: don't come here, or you'll pay with your life. It's also a message many Syrian and Iraqi journalists have been forced to confront as ISIS tries to silence them with threats, kidnapping, and execution. Even more complicated is their approach. They've crafted a central message that isn't just spread through videos of savagery. They try to control their own narrative using a diversity of voices, news programs hosted by hostages to tell their own version of events, to pictures of their daily lives using selfies or cats to balance media reports of their brutality. Many of our colleagues in the industry have participated in a media blackout anytime a brutal video emerges. For some, that means not using ISIS's footage in conveying the news. Others incorporate still images from the videos because they feel that it conveys the broader story with less of the propaganda. When news of James Foley's execution broke, AJ Plus chose to show bits from the video. We reacted in the moment, but we have since reversed that decision.
I think we became... Apology accepted, AJ. All right. So one of the things that the reporter was emphasizing is the age of the internet. There's no longer gatekeepers where you can decide, well, we're not going to be putting your graphic video or imagery. Well, that doesn't really matter anymore, frankly. No, even if all media participate in a blackout, by the time ISIS sends its videos and its images through YouTube, through Twitter, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of supporters have already received it, and even random people who are potential recruits. If you think of the past era, since the invention of mass media, especially television, the pre-internet era, there was very tight control. Gatekeepers can actually decide. If everybody decides blackout, it's blackout, to some extent. Then came the internet age, but the first era of the internet age, where you can send to many people, many individuals can do that, but there's not a lot of interaction. You can't really be able to use it until the dawn of the social media, of the Web 2.0 age in the past 10 years. It's been very recent, actually. And this is actually the era where you're not only individual targeting many, you're many people, many of your soldiers, many of your recruits are targeting many people, but they're not only targeting them as masses. They're targeting them as masses, but they're also targeting them as individuals. This is the key to understanding this era of the social media era. ISIS doesn't only send these messages to terrify people and to attract them en masse. They actually wait and hunt for people who would just respond or comment on a video or an image or a tweet, and then start an individual relationship with them and start recruiting them slowly, one at a time. This is pretty terrifying, actually.
The first thing they told me was I was not allowed to listen to music. The second thing they told me is like how to pray. They did tell me that it is a sin to stay in non-Muslim lands if you have a chance to go to Muslim lands. Because why would we stay in the land of disbelievers and doubters? I live in like a modular home with my grandparents. And it's in the middle of nowhere. We lived in the city, we could walk wherever we wanted. And here, it was a lot better in a lot of ways because it was safer, but it was also, because it was also safer, it was a lot more boring. I've met my friends on the internet. I have more community with them than I have with people in my own community. I was looking for people who agreed with what they were doing so I could understand why they were doing it. And it was actually really easy to find them. Faisal?
You can Google this and watch it on the New York Times website. I just wanted to highlight through this video how it's actually working on an individual level. And if you notice, this is not a Muslim American, an Arab American. This is not an Arab somewhere in the Arab world. This is she's actually a Christian American from the state of Washington, as she said, living in the middle of nowhere. But the other part that I also want to highlight about how ISIS tried to reach both masses and individuals and break through the clutter is through very powerful storytelling techniques. How many of you have watched the video they produced about the Jordanian pilot? All right, so about half the group. When that came out, it's okay. The electricity went out? Okay. So when that video came out, there was a frenzy of coverage in the Arab world. Oh, ما في ترجمة? Okay. I'll wait for a second. We'll watch the video in the meantime. You got it back? There was a frenzy of coverage in the Arab world, especially about the production techniques they have. I remember one of the Al Jazeera reporters was asking me, how could they get these equipment? Oh, it's actually pretty easy to get these equipment. All you need is a high-definition camera and a laptop and a few applications, and you're able to actually produce it if you have the know-how, if you know how to do it. And to know how to do it today, you can pretty much go and do a lot of workshops anywhere around the world. It's pretty accessible. But to be able to really understand the power of storytelling, that is something that needs to be emphasized. So the 23 or 22-minute video they produced after capturing a Jordanian pilot whose plane was shot down over Syria was actually quite telling. They start the video with different sound bites from Arab leaders, mainly the King of Jordan, presenting them as puppets for the West. And then they move on to showing the bombing of Muslim lands. And then they put the actual pilot on air, admitting to his guilt, right? Admitting to his actions. And explaining about all the planes, all the countries that engaged. Notice the hierarchy, notice the layout. That on its own just sends a message of the dominant powers around the world and the puppet Arab regimes. Again, building on grievances that actually exist. I'm not disputing that point actually, but I'm trying to dispute what they're building in terms of offering themselves as a solution. I want to show a small segment of it. Those of you who are in film, in video editing, try to notice the editing technique and the special effects, of course. Sorry for the graphic. Here is the pilot walking in a bombed out area, supposedly the area he bombed out. Notice Notice the interspersing of shots of victims. What do we call that in film? Editors? Any editors in the room? Parallel editing. It's a pretty advanced technique in filmmaking, used by quite a few Hollywood filmmakers. And now, witness the dramatic climactic moment of the story. We started with justifying, offering a problem, building up to what he did, the crimes, walking through the rubble, showing the killed people, all the way building up to the moment of execution. I will not show when he's burning, so don't worry about that. But you need to see and listen to the sound effects and the slow motion. Some of you know the rest. Some of you don't. They burn him alive, and then a bulldozer comes and stamps on him. And then there's an anticlimactic part, where they're actually listing all the names of the pilots who are bombing the caliphate and offering money for those who can kill them. Very well crafted, very well produced. It's not just about the special effects, though. It is about the storytelling. And a controversial statement to say here, some of the most important and most powerful components of religion, any religion, is actually the stories that we remember, the stories that our parents tell us, the stories that we read in the Bible, in the Quran, in other books. There's this powerful component that they're actually capitalizing on. I'm going to skip this, but we already talked about the strong level of production that they have. Henry mentioned this yesterday by any media necessary, and he'd probably talk about it tomorrow more. I'm going to be talking more about the dark side of this, of reappropriating media and techniques of media, not just media content and symbols, to serve their own purpose. ISIS uses a lot of branding techniques. We all know what branding is. Giving products and services an emotional dimension. How many of you have Apple products, iPhones? What's the emotional dimension that you have? Just shout it out, one word. Class. What else? If I give you just any phone that has no brand on it, it probably could be better than an iPhone. Would you feel the same way about it? Brand loyalty, trust, right? That's where what brand loyalty means. That every time I'm going to pick up any Apple product, it's going to be at the same level of class, of quality, of functionality, of usability, etc. States also brand. And there's quite a body of research now that is building up about state branding and city branding. A state brand is a public's mental image of a state. It aims to create emotional resonance for global publics with the image of a state or place. What's the first word that comes up when I show you this? Paris? Romance. Eiffel Tower. There's no emotional component there. Romance, where did that romance come from? A lot of movies, a lot of intentional building of this brand. I'm pretty sure you can have a lot of romantic moments in Paris, but I've had a very few really lousy experiences when I've been in Paris. It's not always romance. Actually, it was never romance for me. But this is how a brand works. And it is a little bit difficult to convince you that actually ISIS uses branding, because branding is often associated with something positive. And ISIS in our mind is something pretty terrifying. But this is actually their brand. One of the things that have always amused me is these orange jumpers that symbolize the imprisonment of Muslims in Guantanamo Bay around the world. Only a little bit more. But ISIS executioners from multiple places around the world, disconnected, are able to actually put their prisoners in these jumpers. There must be some factories behind that to produce so much orange jumpsuits. Their graphics, very consistent, very powerful. Notice the triangles in almost all of their the layout of their graphics. Even when somebody is actually countering their brand, this is the beauty of brands. Even if you attack a brand, actually, in many cases, you're strengthening it. This is another group of Syrian quote-unquote jihadists who caught a few ISIS fighters and executed them. They flipped the image, right? But they are still playing into this powerful, terrifying brand of ISIS. Their magazine, I showed you the front page of it. You saw in the video the positive imagery of it. It's not always negative. They do have some images where this guy, he seems to be very photogenic according to ISIS. Maybe he's the one who's recruiting a lot of the most number of people. Or ISIS fighters like Nutella, I don't know. It's funny, but it's sad at the same time. They also use video games, and very popular video games. They hacked into the Grand Theft Auto video game, one of the most popular video games around the world, extremely violent to start with, but they flipped the characters. I'll show you a few videos of that. This is their promotional video. Your games which are produced from, we do the same actions in the battlefields. Imagine like youngsters who like to play this game, who like to shoot things up. A lot of people ask me sometimes, why do people join ISIS? For many different reasons. Some for religious reasons, some just for the action. They like to blow things up like they've been watching on TV all their lives, on videos and films and in video games. We actually do it. Just come and join us. Remember this chant.
درب الكما فإما حياة تسر الهدى
They not only hacked into the game and keep the lights down, please. Keep the lights down. Fuad, keep the lights down. They not only hacked into the game and changed the characters. They actually added their own weapons. They actually added their own explosives that target military convoys and stuff. Here's another video that.
Passenger plane flying from Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh to St.
Actually
Petersburg
promotes real
has
events.
disappeared from the radar.
It was something that was strong enough to bring the aircraft down. It's going to do a lot of wreckage to the frame, to the airframe.
A Paris evening erupts in violence. Dozens have been killed in shootings and explosions, the deadliest attacks in France in decades.
This is an attack not just on Paris, it's an attack not just on the people of France, but this is an attack on all of humanity and the universal values that we share.
He shot at us for like 10 to 15 minutes. It was
Okay, I'll stop it here. This is actually the wrong video to show you. Sorry, it was queued up incorrectly. This is the one I want to show you. Change the attire so you can actually be an ISIS fighter in the game. Change the context, you can burn people. In downtown, shooting at police. Chants in the background, running planes into the towers. What is a little bit scary about this is this game actually came out a couple of years ago, before the attacks in Munich, in Paris. Some of the videos actually show people in the streets just shooting civilians, which the game allows you to do, the original game. But they actually give ideas of people going into airports and shooting up the area. That happened before the attack on the Turkish airport and the Brussels airport. So it's not just about we actually do these things. Here are some ideas for you if you actually are interested in doing it where you are right now. Aside from video games, actually they use a lot of hacking techniques. At one point they hacked into the US Central Command Facebook group. There was actually a counter attack too. Anonymous have been fighting them on the dark web. They go in wherever there's something related to ISIS, they go in and just post pornography. They use cartoons and apps to attract kids. Here's an app that actually teaches the alphabet in Arabic. Notice that every letter is represented by a weapon. بندقية, دال دبابة, طه طلقة, صاروخ. مع إنه هيدي بسميها رصاصة أنا, but they use the word طلقة. This was actually pretty funny in many cases until your child receives it on their cell phone. This is a video that my daughter, she was 11, she received it in her WhatsApp group, which was only for her class. She was in 6th grade, عالي أول متوسط.
Music. I dig blues music. We don't like children's music. No.
What music are you into? I like this. It's very grown up.
صليل الصوارم نشيد الأباء ودرب القتال طريق الحياة فبين اقتحام يبيد الطغاة وكتيم صوت جميل صدى صليل الصوارم نشيد الأباء ودرب القتال طريق
around video games and the blowing up in cartoons is that one of the goals of ISIS, along the lines of eliminating the gray, of polarizing people, is generalizing violence, making violence the norm. This is actually quite serves their purposes and their goals. If violence becomes something that everybody does and doesn't really care about, and something we don't think twice about, that actually means more terrorist attacks, more exposure to them, more credibility, more recruits. So in many cases, there are people, just so to end on a slightly positive, but I hope not offensive note, some people are putting effort to countering ISIS. Has anyone seen the video of these minions? Okay, I do hope this doesn't offend you, but you have to see it.
صديق الصارم نشيد الأباء ودرب القتال طريق الحياة فبين اقتحام يبيد الطغاة وكتيم صوت جميل صدى صديق الصارم نشيد الأباء ودرب القتال طريق الحياة فبين اقتحام يبيد الطغاة وكتيم صوت جميل صدى
You can watch the rest. Just Google Minions, ISIS, and you'll find. I don't know how much this is affecting, but at least some people are putting some counter efforts. I know Henry is going to talk a lot more about different pop culture symbols tomorrow and how different groups around the world use them for their own activist purposes. I'll end on this quote from Philip Sieb and I'm phasing out on her first name. Last name Jambak. Dana Jambak. She was at the Salzburg Academy a few years ago. The modern communication model used by terrorist organizations is audience-based, meaning-centered, culture-dependent, and always tied into an ongoing narrative stream that is part of the social-political context. Again, going back to the 3 points that I was highlighting earlier. Building on grievances, building on things that actually exist in our culture. These are not fake things that they're talking about. They do present themselves as a solution, which is very powerful. Using terrorism and media integrated in sync with each other. Not two separate things, not terrorism and then media happens. No, media and terrorism techniques, content, methods integrated with each other to be able to send the dual message of terrorism. The negative, terrifying message for the opponents and the actual recruitment message for the potential supporters and the potential recruits. And all of this goes into a cycle of eliminating the gray, polarizing people, and according to them, probably hoping that enough people will come to their side and they will be able to win the battle. In sum, the synchronized media terror design of modern terrorism offers the following: exposure, which gives attention and credibility, generalized violence and eliminating the gray, polarizing people, recruitment of potential supporters, deterrence of opponents, creating and building a community of supporters, which in the end all feeds into the goal of state building the Khilafah. And one controversial thing I will say, if this supposed or quote-unquote Khilafah lasts for another couple of years or 3 years, it will probably be a permanent fixture in this part of the world. And eventually, in 10 years, 15 years, we will forget about their crimes, and it will just become one of those states. Just another fundamentalist state that to be added to this part of the world, unfortunately. But I'm only interested right now in the media part of their use. So we have how many minutes for questions? 9 minutes? Lunch is at 12:30? Okay, 9 minutes of questions. Please keep it tied to the media component. I'm not a political expert, I'm not a military expert, so don't ask me what weapons they use. I have no idea.
دكتور، نحن يعني كصحفيون كيف لنا أن نضمن حق الناس بالمعرفة وأن لا نكون أداة تسويق لهذه التنظيمات في الوقت اللي هذه الأخبار اللي صادرة عنهم بتشكل بيئة خصبة لجذب الجمهور.
Okay. For those who didn't get the question, as journalists, how can we, what techniques, what methods can we use in order not to serve their purposes and to actually achieve the goal of informing the people? I have a quite pessimistic view of this. As a journalist, I will always do my job of conveying news, informing the public, and avoiding the propaganda. But unfortunately, the climate that we are in right now, the environment, the media environment, we are in right now, it doesn't really matter what we do as journalists. But we should keep on doing it. We should keep on doing that. They can reach people without the mass media. The mass media are helping them to some extent spread, but they are actually able to still reach people regardless of how we cover. I think terrorism, I think ISIS is a symptom of a bigger problem. And if we can solve that problem, all of the other symptoms will go away. But that's a different matter. As journalists, we should keep doing our jobs and go back to the basics. What is newsworthy? Is pornographic violence newsworthy? I don't think so, because that's what it actually is. Is informing people and helping them protect themselves from a terrorist attack when it's happening? Yes, that is newsworthy, that is something important to do. How can we do it without serving these groups? That's the challenge that each one of us has to take on, right? Fadal. Okay, Fadali.
I'd like to go back to what you've mentioned before regarding media and terrorism, and saying that if terrorism would be eliminated if it wasn't spread through media. However, we sometimes forget about word of mouth, and that the word of mouth is also a very strong medium to spread news. So it is almost impossible to eliminate terrorism if we eliminate media, unless we all not even speak about those events.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a slightly a misinterpretation of what I said, but let me tell you these two things. Even if I said that, no one can eliminate media. Media are here to stay. So forget about that part of the argument. And the goal is not, I wasn't saying that we need to eliminate media in order to eliminate terrorism. No. Terrorism, again, is a symptom of a problem that exists. We need to eliminate the problem. Even this silly notion of war on terrorism is just a fake propagandistic way of pushing for an ongoing war and ongoing military acquisition and building of armies. We can't fight terrorism. Terrorism is a method of war, if you think about it militaristically. You can't fight bullets. You can't fight weapons. You can fight soldiers, you can fight armies, you can fight states, right? But going back to the argument, yes, word of mouth is a form of communication. It is not as effective when it comes to terrorism. In the past, in history, yes, when certain leaders wanted to send a message to a certain enemy, they would slaughter 1,000 people, but they would also sometimes send the head of the leader of that army, just to generate this terrifying image. Because the word of mouth on its own, it's not going to be very helpful. I was reading a book recently about design and how pirates designed their attire, the way they look, and the flag, the terrifying look of the flag, the black flag with the skull and the bones. And the purpose is to instantly send a message to whoever they're attacking that we are going to do the worst thing you can ever imagine to you if you don't surrender right now. And people, just this message would cause a lot of opponent ships to just surrender and give up. This imagery not only sends the message of terrorism, it actually exaggerates it. If you think in very calculating and cold terms, terrorism really is a very ineffective military technique on its own. You can't use it to occupy land. It's even not effective if you want to kill soldiers. It doesn't kill that many soldiers. It doesn't kill that many people. Even the most terrifying terrorist event of our era, that's most covered, 9/11, 3,000 people killed, give or take. What is that in the scheme of how many people are killed in the US in terms of traffic accidents? In terms of like small disease, it's really small. However, the media, the way the message is sent, it totally exaggerates it and totally makes it more terrifying. I hope I answered your question. 3 minutes?
Dr. Jad, thank you for the amazing lecture, especially the details of the communication tactics you are using. I want to go to the last part of the measurements and the kind of manipulated cartoons.
Yes.
We had a debate among our group because one of my colleagues did one of these videos, but it was a dancing one.
The one that
Not
I
the
showed?
measurements. No, it's a dancing one.
The dancing one?
Dancing one.
The Minions, your friend did it?
No, it used to be some kind of Saudi dancing.
Oh, okay, yeah, I heard about it.
Yeah. Okay, so he had got a point of view that he's humiliating them. He's just making fun of them. He's just trying to minimize the negative side effect of what they are doing. But other people said that you are giving them a new voice. You are making fun of them, yes, but you are making it more heard. People are watching it on YouTube. So, what do you think? Should we stop? We can stop people from watching it from online because it's already online, it's already streamed. And so, shall we stop making that kind of funny movies because it's a tactic, it's a technique now. We are making fun of everything. So, what do you think?
I mean, it doesn't really matter what I say or what you say if we can stop. Whoever's going to make it in this climate can make it, that's fine. Actually, I think it does serve a purpose. It serves a purpose of undermining the terrifying image of ISIS. Does it also help promote ISIS? Yes. So it's not just a black or white. Yeah, there is some advantage that ISIS is gaining out of this. But at the same time, we are undermining their very terrifying image. We are putting them singing and playing. There are also other negative outcomes. The use of Quranic verses, the use of prayers over music and minions, that actually might alienate some religious people, right? And why are you making fun of my beliefs, even if you are attacking ISIS? So we need to see it in a multifaceted way. I'll stop there because I know Henry is going to talk a lot about this tomorrow, and he's much more of an expert on these topics. Okay, one more question. Well, so let's take 3 questions at the same time.
دكتور
تفضل.
كان في جدال مستمر بينه وبين مجموعة من الزملاء الصحفيين على موضوع استضافة حديث لمصادر من داعش أو القاعدة داخل المواضيع الصحفية. احنا ما بنحكي عن حوار خاص أو حصري قدر شخص يوصل لشخصية معينة منهم ويحكي معهم، مع إنه كثيرين من عنده هذا الشيء بلشوا يتأثروا فيهم من الصحفيين، وهذا شيء غريب كثير يعني صارت ظاهرة. بس أنا بحكي عن الحديث العام. إذا احنا بدنا نعمل توازن بالمادة الصحفية، حكينا مع مصدر مثلا اليوم من الجيش السوري أو من الجيش العراقي، وفجأة وتقول أو قالت مصادر خاصة أو أبو فلان من التنظيمات. أنا كان عندي باب اعتراض على شيء، إنه إحنا إذا قادرين نحكي معهم وفي باب للحوار لشو الحرب، هذا سؤال جوهري. السؤال الثاني إنه إحنا بالمواد العادية عمال بنفتح لهم باب، بينما هم لهم وسائل الإعلام اللي يحكوا فيها، فمش كثير لازم نسهل للعالم فتح الباب لهم. ما مش عارف شو رأيك مهنيا بهذا الموضوع، هل هذا شيء كثير إيجابي؟
So your question is, should we include them on our TV shows or in our media discussions? Should we invite some of the ISIS or Al-Qaeda guys? I believe strongly in including all voices, even the voices that you disagree with. And frankly, let them go on air and let them talk, let them defend what they're saying. As a journalist, I should be trying to stand at a certain distance from these multiple voices. I think actually they will, let me use a crude term, put their foot in their mouth when they go on air, because they will not be able to defend the questions that any decent journalist will be able to ask them about religion. I mean, the basic, why are you killing Muslims? Why are you killing people? Right? I mean, just basic questions, and they will be exposed to the fraud that they are actually are in terms of hijacking religion and using religion for their own causes of building a state, of political causes, not religious causes. They don't have a religious cause. They have a state cause. They are building a state. But so yeah, I agree with you. We should. Let's have 3 questions at the same time, and I'll try to answer them quickly so that we don't keep you from lunch. Yeah.
I just want to refer to his question earlier. You said that those videos kind of undermine the image, undermine the fearful image of ISIS. But the problem is, there is a reality in that image. People are getting killed. People are getting bombed. So, should we really undermine their image? I mean, should we undermine the fear that they present when it's irrational fear to have of them?
Okay, let's get multiple questions.
أول شيء يعطيك العافية على المحاضرة القيمة. بس حضرتك حكيت إنه داعش كانت تستخدم تقنيات وكان إعلام هدف أساسي من وسائلها للترويج لها. قديش ساهم وسائل الإعلام الغربية بالذات بخلال نقل المقاطع، هاي الفيديو ولا المقاطع ولا كذا، بترويج لداعش وخلق هذه من خلال إعلام؟ وهل يا ترى فعلا في وراهم شركات بتنتجوا هالتقنيات هاي العليا؟ لانه مثلا فيلم لما طلع اعدام الطيار الاردني كان انا حسيت حالي بشوفه فيلم في هوليوود، يعني اخراج يعني عايز عنه اي وسيله اعلام عربي انتاجه. مثلا الدوله الاسلاميه الافتراضيه اللي حكيت حضرتك عنها انشئت من خلال ايام صار عندها التقنيات هاي العاليه. فشو رايك بالموضوع هذا؟ شكرا لك.
شكرا لك. One more question. تفضل.
يمكن بدي اضيف على النقطة اللي حكاها زميلنا. باليومين الماضيين حكينا انه في بعض البلاد الميديا عندهم محصورة يعني الناس الكبار بالشركات الكبيرة زي البي بي سي وغيره وغيره وغيره. قديش هم يعني حتى احنا لما نيجي نطلع على الميديا عنا او على الاخبار اللي عم تطلع عنا عم تطلع بالنهاية من عندهم، يعني عم تطلع المعلومات من عندهم واحنا بس يعني عم ننقل نفس المعلومات تقريبا. في كتير مثلا جهات كمان إعلامية عربية عم بلاحظ لما بقرأها من برا هي مترجمة بالضبط حرفيا أو متاخدة كوبي وبيست من الإعلام خلينا نقول العالمي أو اللي هم متحكمين بالميديا بشكل عام بالعالم. أنا عندي قناعة تماماً إنه هي kind of politics، يعني هي أمور سياسية، يعني حتى الشركات الكبيرة بالإعلام يعني مأثرة عليها البوليتكس نفسها. وبنفس الوقت عم نعمل بروباغندا، يعني هدول شركات الإعلام والبوليتكس والسياسيين هم اللي قاعدين عم بيأثروا بهدول المعلومات. قديش ممكن إنه كميديا إحنا كأشخاص بيشتغلوا بالصحافة بيشتغلوا بالإعلام إنه فعلاً نكون قادرين على إنه نشتغل الضد. احنا داخل الميديا لكن احنا عم نشتغل ضد. ما نحاول انه احنا نطلع المعلومات هاي البروباغندا اللي عم بتصير. نحاول نخفف من المعلومات اللي عم تطلع. في كثير معلومات زي ما انت عم تحكي قبل شوي، حكيت عن فرنسا. حكينا مثلا عن المطار اللي صار ببلجيكا، بس ما عرفنا او ما يمكن مش كل الناس عرفت انه من يومين 3 صار في اتاك كمان بوليس وومن ببلجيكا نفسها وقتلهم واحد، وكمان اعلنت عنها داعش. فامتى احنا بدنا نكبر الموضوع، بدنا نكبره كميديا، وامتى بدنا نصغره. فهذه شوي كريتيكال ايشوز بتخيل انه كثير في دور للصحافه انه احنا نشتغل عليها حتى لو انها كانت ضد شغلنا بشكل او باخر، لحتى انه احنا ما نبرز حالنا. ما بعرف اذا هو سؤال او نقطه، بس
Let me try to answer this as effective as I can. Should we be countering ISIS with these comic videos? I believe with any media necessary, I believe what Henry was saying. Anything we can do as individuals, as groups, as countries, we should do to counter this violence. Not only to counter terrorism, not only to counter them as evil beings. My goal is to counter them so that they do not establish a state at my country's border, just 2 hours away. I do not want another fundamentalist state right next to my country, to be clear. And there are many fundamentalist states in this part of the world. I can name two so that I'm not accused of being one side or the other. There's Saudi Arabia and there's Iran. I don't want another Saudi Arabia or another Iran in this part of the world. We need to do everything we can do. My role is to expose their media technique and media strategies. Your role, wherever you are, as a journalist, use your position. As a student, do research on them, study them. We need to fight them with anything we can. You can edit cartoons, do it. You can create video games, you can hack their websites, do it. Because we all now are empowered to do these things. We're not just sitting waiting for some president to decide that the country is going to do this. The question was about their media production techniques, right? Okay. I disagree that Arab channels cannot do this production quality. Let me give you an example from a different era, from 2006. One of the biggest mistakes of Israel in the 2006 war is that they underestimated Hezbollah, not only in the military arena, in the media arena. Hezbollah presented such a competent media strategy that overwhelmed Israel's efforts. And then everybody was asking, oh, where did they get it from? Iran? Iranians don't really have that much of a great media. No, actually they got it from the Hezbollah members who have studied and who have practiced media techniques and media methods and media strategies for the past 20 years. I'm not defending ISIS, I'm not defending Hezbollah. Although if I had to choose between defending one or the other, I will defend Hezbollah as a resistance group. But we need to understand that the techniques, the equipment, and the know-how is available today. If you want to know how to produce these special effects, you can go on YouTube and watch a few techniques. There's like hundreds of free lessons to do it. If you are willing to put the effort. Susan was talking about media literacy as a method of self-empowerment. She teaches not how to use Twitter, but she teaches you how to not be scared of technology, to go and learn it yourself. Don't you think there are smart people who can actually learn it themselves? In addition, there's evidence that there was actually a Palestinian who studied in the US about filmmaking. He was a world expert. And there was another Syrian who actually was a computer scientist who knows how to create apps. And these two were part of the Al Hayat media team who were producing videos and producing apps. Yes, there are people from this part of the world who are extremely smart and competent and able. Unfortunately, they're with ISIS right now. I wish they were with another group, more secular group, but they are able to do that. Buying the equipment, a virtual state that has tanks, that is actually making millions of dollars every day, it takes you like $100,000 to buy the latest cutting edge equipment. I know because we're buying it for LAU now, and it's widely available. I bet that like even half of my students here at LAU can produce something like that if I give them the time and the budget and the equipment. It's not difficult. The difficult part was the storytelling. This is where talent comes in. The Hollywood part, the storytelling, the climactic moment. And the marketing and the strategy is something out of this world. I mean, something very new. This is why I'm interested in it. And the last part is when do we cover them and make the story big? When do we make it small? We don't have control about that anymore. I mean, don't be delusional about our ability as journalists or media institutions or the BBC or anyone else. I want to give you an example that Moses was actually talking about Trump, Donald Trump. Do you remember that New York Times front page? Every single story had Trump once or more, either in the headline or in text. Many people in the US now are just going crazy. Like, how could someone like that become our president? Many people I know, pretty much everyone around, every one of my American friends are just flipping. And what do? A lot of them are putting effort in countering that. And by countering that, they're actually promoting the name even more, sometimes exposing his lies, sometimes not, but the guy is still there. And he's still getting a lot of support. And he might become the next president of the most powerful country in the world. Try to apply that to ISIS. Yes, do we stop countering them? No, we don't stop countering them. And when we counter them, are we actually promoting them further? Yes. We need to see it as a multifaceted element. That, yes, there will be some negatives, there will be some positives, but we need to keep putting our efforts as individuals and as groups. I hope I answered your question. Khalas? Thank you very much.